They poured Coca-Cola on her head for a laugh, humiliating a nobody waitress while they filmed it. What they didn't know is that her husband wasn't the simple foreman he pretended to be. He was the most powerful man in New York, and they had just started a war they couldn't possibly win. Welcome to our channel. Before we see how this unfolds, let us know you're here, comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if you're ready to see justice served, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story. The hiss of a steam iron was the only sound in the quiet Brooklyn kitchen. Sofia Martinez's face was a mask of concentration as she guided the hot plate over the sleeve of a crisp, white uniform blouse. The creases she formed were sharp enough to cut. Her movements were meticulous, practiced, honed by years of repetition. This wasn't just a shirt, it was her armor for the night. Their apartment was a sanctuary, a warm, lived-in space of exposed brick and dark wood that smelled faintly of old coffee and the lemon polish she used every Saturday. This home, this life, was something she and Dante Morelli had built from scratch. She was proud of it. She was proud of her job, too. Being a waitress at the Riverside Grand Hotel wasn't just a gig, it was a career. She was senior staff, trusted with the high-profile galas, the billionaire birthdays, the political fundraisers. She was a professional. She could carry 8 plates, remember the complex string orders of a 12-top, and defuse a rich man's simmering impatience with a single, polite smile. It was a craft, and she was an artisan. A pair of large, strong hands circled her waist. Dante rested his chin on her shoulder, his sigh warm against her neck. "Gonna be the sharpest-looking one there, amore," he mumbled into her hair. Sofia leaned back against his solid frame, a small smile touching her lips. "That's the point. These people, they don't even see you if you're not perfect." Dante's hands tightened. He turned her slightly, his gaze intense. His face was handsome in a rugged, worn way. His knuckles were calloused, his forearms thick with muscle. He looked exactly like what she believed him to be, the best construction foreman in the city. "I see you," he said. He kissed her, a deep, comforting kiss that tasted like the cheap beer he'd just had. His hands, rough and sandpapery from a work, cupped her face. Those hands were the physical proof of their life. They were hands that built things, hands that fixed the leaky faucet last winter, hands that held her when she was sick. "I've got to finish," she said, pulling away gently. "It's the Marlowe Group Gala tonight. Tips should be insane." A flicker, something imperceptible, lasting less than a heartbeat, passed through Dante's eyes at the name. Marlowe. Right. Richard Marlowe's party. Big shot developer. "He's just another rich guy in a bad suit to me," Sofia said. "But his insane tips are paying for that vacation to Mexico. You deserve it. You work harder than any of them." He released her and grabbed his heavy Carhartt jacket from the hook by the door. He had played this part for their entire 12-year relationship, and he played it to perfection. He looked the part, right down to the steel-toed boots and the faded jeans. He talked about unions, about concrete pours, about lazy inspectors. He played Dante the foreman with an actor's flawless dedication. "Late one for you, too?" she asked. "Yeah," he sighed, running a hand through his thick hair. "This new Hudson Yards site, the city's killing us on the permits. Gotta go meet a guy, grease the wheels." It was the perfect, mundane problem. A believable friction in his work life that required his late-night attention. Greasing the wheels sounded exactly like what a foreman would have to do, take a city planner out for beers and wings. Sofia nodded, turning back to the shirt. She'd transformed now. Buttoning up the pristine blouse, she became Sofia the waitress. Composed, professional, unflappable. Dante watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he walked over and kissed the back of her neck. "I'll see you when you get home. Don't let those rich bastards get to you. They're just part of the job," she said, her voice confident. The door clicked shut. Sophia stood alone in the warm kitchen, the scent of his aftershave lingering. She adjusted her simple, black bow tie in the reflection of the microwave. Perfect. She grabbed her keys, walking out of their safe, stable home and into the Manhattan night. She believed in their life. She believed in the future they were building with their own two hands. She believed, implicitly, in the perfect lie. The Crystal Ballroom at the Riverside Grand was another world, a stratosphere of wealth so high the air felt different, thin and sharp. It wasn't just a room, it was a galaxy of generational power. Chandeliers dripped light like liquid diamonds, shattering into 1,000 pieces on the surface of champagne flutes. The air hummed with the sound of confident laughter, the murmur of multi-million-dollar deals being struck over canapés, and the distant, polite swell of a string quartet. Sophia Martinez moved through it like a ghost. Her armor was her invisibility. Her steps were silent on the plush carpet, her hands steady as she cleared plates heavy with untouched caviar and refilled glasses with wine that cost more than her monthly rent. She kept her eyes down, her expression a perfect, neutral mask. She was a phantom in a black and white uniform, and that was exactly how they preferred her. She had perfected the art of being present but unseen, a silent cog in the flawless machine of their luxury. But some tables refused to let you be invisible. Table 7 was a vortex of noise and obnoxious energy, a stain of new money arrogance on the ballroom's elegant fabric. 5 men in their late 20s, suits impeccably tailored but worn with the sloppiness of profound drunkenness. They were celebrating something, their laughter too loud, their gestures too broad. At the center, holding court, was Ethan Marlowe. Blonde, blue-eyed, with a jawline that belonged on a recruitment poster and a Patek Philippe watch that gleamed like a warning light. He was the heir, the prince of the Marlowe real estate empire, and he radiated the toxic, corrosive entitlement of a man who had never, in his entire life, been told no. They weren't just drinking, they were performing, a pack of hyenas making sure everyone knew they were the most important, and most wasted, people in the room. Sophia's section rotation brought her, inevitably, to their table. She approached with a silent prayer, her silver tray held high. "More water, sir?" she asked, her voice the smooth, neutral tone she reserved for difficult guests. "Look at this one, Ethan," one of his friends slurred, snapping his fingers near her face, a sound like a small firecracker. "It's like a little porcelain doll." "Don't you talk, doll?" Sophia ignored the snap. Her training was a fortress. "Sir?" Ethan leaned in, his breath a hot, acidic wave of expensive whiskey. He squinted at her name tag, his eyes struggling to focus. "Sophie," he dragged the name out. "That's pretty. You're pretty. You got a boyfriend, Sophie?" "I'm married, sir," she replied, her voice firm but quiet, her eyes fixed on the water pitcher. This sent them into gales of hysterical laughter. "Married," one of them shrieked. "To who? The busboy? What's he do, a construction worker?" another one cackled, the insult finding its mark with uncanny precision. Sophia's jaw tightened, a small, hard knot of muscle, but her mask held. "Do not engage. Do not react. You are a professional. They are just spoiled children." She finished pouring the water, her hand perfectly steady. "Will there be anything else, gentlemen?" Her refusal to be baited, her calm dignity, was a lit match to Ethan's ego. He wanted a reaction. He wanted her to cry, or yell, or plead. Her professionalism was an act of defiance he couldn't stand. He saw it, in his drunken paranoia, as her looking down on him. "Hey," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the laughter of his friends. "I'm talking to you." Sophia paused, tray in hand, every nerve ending screaming. "Yes, sir." "You think you're better than us," he sneered, his handsome face twisting into something ugly. "Serving us drinks, cleaning our plates. You think you're better?" "I'm just doing my job, sir." "Your job," he scoffed, as if the word itself was offensive. He looked at the table, at his half-full glass of Coca-Cola, the mixer for his rum. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. He had found his punchline. You know, you look a little stressed, Sophia. You should cool off. He stood up. The movement was sudden, lurching. Sophia instinctively took a step back, but she was cornered by another guest's chair. It happened in slow motion, the way all disasters do. He grabbed the glass. He took 2 steps. He inverted it, deliberately and carefully, directly over her head. The liquid was shockingly cold. It wasn't a splash, it was a pour. A slow, steady, humiliating cascade. It ran in sticky rivulets down her face, blinding her, pasting her dark hair to her scalp and neck. Ice cubes hit her shoulders and scattered across the marble floor with a sound like tiny gunshots. The music seemed to stutter. The entire ballroom, or at least her corner of it, went utterly silent. A collective gasp, 100 pairs of eyes turning. Then, the silence was shattered by the roar of laughter from table 7. Ethan's friends howled, slapping the table, one of them already holding up his phone, its camera light a little red dot in her blurred, sticky vision. He treated her like she wasn't even human. If you think that kind of disgusting arrogance is a disease, smash that a like button. Only a bully like Ethan would just scroll by without a second thought. Sophia stood frozen, dripping, unable to breathe. The humiliation was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on her chest. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape, and they locked for one horrifying, crystal-clear second with Richard Marlowe. The father. The patriarch. He was only 10 feet away, at a different table, watching. He saw her. He saw the wet hair, the ruined uniform, the tears of shame welling in her eyes. He saw his son, grinning, victorious. He held her gaze. And he turned away. He turned back to his conversation, a silent, brutal dismissal. She wasn't worth the interruption. Philip, her manager, materialized at her elbow, his face a blotchy, terrified red. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at the laughing table. He looked at her, his eyes filled with fury. Sophia. What did you do? He hissed, his fingers digging into her arm. Go to the break room. Now. He was already bowing and scraping to Ethan. Mr. Marlowe, I am so sorry. So unprofessional. We will handle this. Please, enjoy your evening. Handled. She was the problem. Sophia stumbled away, the whispers and stares of the room burning her back. The sticky cola dripped down her neck, a cold, sugary reminder of exactly where she stood. In this world, she was nothing. She didn't cry on the subway home. Tears were a luxury, a hot release of pressure, and what she felt was the opposite. It was a cold, hard, heavy stone settling deep in her gut. She was vibrating with a silent, crystalline rage. Her hair, stiff and tacky, was starting to smell of dried sugar and chemical brown sugar. Her blouse, the one she had ironed with such pride, was a ruined, sticky mess. Every averted stare from the other passengers on the R train was a fresh wave of shame, a new set of eyes reminding her of what she was, a joke. The humiliation had calcified. When she finally turned the key in her own front door, the click of the lock sounded deafeningly loud. The apartment was dark, save for the single dim light over the kitchen sink. Dante was there, sitting at their small table, a half-empty bottle of beer in his hand, as if he'd been waiting. He looked up, a smile starting to form, and then it evaporated. He didn't move. He didn't rush to her. He just saw. His eyes catalogued the matted hair, the dark streaks of cola on her face, the ruined uniform, the way she was holding herself, rigid as glass. He didn't have to ask, what happened? Sophia finally let out the breath she felt she'd been holding since she fled the ballroom. The words came out, not in a sob, but as a clipped, precise, factual report. I was at work. The Marlowe Gala. Table 7. Ethan Marlowe. He was drunk. He poured a glass of Coca-Cola on my head. She recited the facts, her voice devoid of emotion. His friends filmed it. His father, Richard Marlowe, was 10 feet away. He watched. He saw me. He turned back to his conversation. She finished, breathless, waiting. She expected him to explode. She expected the Dante she knew, the passionate, hot-blooded man who would put his fist through a wall over a parking ticket. She expected him to yell, to rage, to curse the names of the rich bastards who had hurt his wife. Dante did none of those things. He stood up, but his movement was unnervingly slow. The color didn't drain from his face, if anything, his expression just settled. His eyes, the warm brown eyes that she loved, went flat. They became cold, dark, and bottomless. It was a terrifying stillness, the profound calm of a deep ocean trench right before an earthquake. He looked at her, but his gaze seemed to pass through her, his mind already somewhere else, calculating, planning, executing. This cold precision was 1,000 times more frightening than any rage. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements economical, deliberate. He pressed a single number from his favorites. "Luca," he said. His voice was a low, soft gravel, barely audible, yet it filled the room with a sudden, chilling authority. He listened for a second. "I want everything on the Marlowe family. Not just the kid. The father. Their projects, their financing, their permits, their political connections." He paused, his cold eyes finally meeting hers. "I want to know where every dollar comes from and where every skeleton is buried. I want it by morning." Click. He hung up. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't cursed. He had just signed a death warrant. And that single, quiet phone call was the key. It was the click that unlocked a decade of tiny, nagging inconsistencies, a mental box of cognitive dissonance that Sophia had kept sealed shut. Why was their foreman's home office, the one in the back, always locked? What permits required him to leave at 3 in the morning? Why did the captain of the local precinct, a man she saw at a street fair, nod to Dante with a look of pure, unadulterated deference, not friendship? The expensive Patek Philippe watch he wore, a good knockoff, he'd said with a wink, suddenly seemed very, very real. The union meetings that always ended with men in dark, identical suits leaving their house, never smiling, never speaking. All these tiny, wrong puzzle pieces now slammed together, forming a picture she couldn't, and wouldn't, unsee. "Take a shower, amore," Dante said, his voice still that terrible, soft monotone. "Wash it off. I have to make some arrangements." He walked past her, his hand brushing her shoulder, and she flinched. He didn't seem to notice. She heard their bedroom door click shut, then the bathroom door, and finally the hiss of the pipes as the shower started. He was washing his armor on. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She was shaking, but not from the humiliation anymore. This was a new, electric fear. She went to the back room. The locked office door. A simple pin tumbler lock. He'd taught her how to pick one years ago, on a rainy Sunday. "Just in case you ever lock yourself out," he'd laughed. A flimsy paperclip from the junk drawer in the kitchen. A bobby pin from her own hair, still sticky with soda. The lie of that moment, of his casual lesson, hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't teaching her self-reliance. He was training her. Her hands fumbled, but the memory was there. The bobby pin for tension. The paperclip to rake. The tumblers clicked, one by one. The knob turned. The door swung open. The room smelled of old leather, expensive scotch, and paper. There were no blueprints on the walls. No hard hats stacked in the corner. No safety manuals on the shelf. There was a wall-to-wall whiteboard covered in a terrifying flowchart of names, dates, and lines connecting Shell corporations, Riverside Holdings, Apex Concrete, Tri-State Logistics. It was a spider's web, and in the center, the name Dante Morelli. On his immaculate mahogany desk sat pristine, leather-bound ledgers. She opened one. Numbers that made her sick. Millions. Tens of millions. Payments, transfers, consulting fees. She saw photos, not of them on vacation, but of him. Dante, smiling, arm in arm with the police commissioner. Dante on a boat with Senator McBain. Dante at a table with 3 of the city's most powerful judges. And then, in the very center of the desk, as if waiting for him, sat a single, neat manila file. The label was typed. Marlowe Group. Her hands were numb, clumsy. She opened it. Contracts. Supply agreements. Shipping manifests. Invoices. Dante's shell companies weren't just working for the Marlows. They were their entire supply chain. He provided every bag of cement, every yard of concrete, every ton of steel for all 4 of their active, billion-dollar projects. He wasn't just a foreman. He was the foundation. The shower stopped. The silence that fell was absolute. The air in the office was thick, unbreathable. She heard the bathroom door open. She heard his bare footsteps on the hardwood floor. He appeared in the doorway, a towel slung low on his hips, his hair damp, steam rising from his shoulders. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He just looked weary. The performance was over. He was caught. "You're not a foreman," she whispered. The words felt like glass in her throat. The file trembled in her hand. "You are, what are you?" He didn't move from the doorway. His voice was soft, but it filled the room, hard and unbending as the steel he supplied. "I am the man who controls every bag of concrete, every union contract, and every building permit in this city." "You are a mobster," she choked out, the word tasting like poison. "I'm a businessman," he corrected her, his eyes finally locking on hers, the coldness back, the predator in plain sight. "They just don't know it." He stepped into the room and gently took the file from her numb fingers, placing it back on the desk with deliberate care. He looked at her, at the last remnants of her ruined uniform, at the new, raw terror that had replaced the anger in her eyes. "Yes," he said, as if answering the question she hadn't dared to ask. "I own this city. And they just hurt my wife." Sophia's world shattered. The floor gave way, revealing a bottomless dark. Her entire life, the warm kitchen, the hard-earned vacations, the man with the calloused hands, was a lie. A perfect, beautiful, terrifying lie. She wasn't just the victim of a rich, spoiled brat. She was the wife of the most powerful, and most dangerous, man in New York. And he had just been given a reason to go to war. Dante didn't sleep. He sat in the dark of his home office, the glow of a single monitor illuminating his face, turning his calm expression into a marble mask. Sophia was in their bedroom, the door closed. He could hear her muffled sobs, the sound of a life shattering. That sound was the fuel. He wasn't a mobster. He was an industrialist. He was a logician. And as the sun began to stain the Brooklyn sky a pale, sickly gray, he began to methodically dismantle the Marlowe empire. His war wasn't fought with guns, it was fought with phone calls, with logistics, with the interconnected web of the city he held in his palm. At 6:01 a.m., a city inspector, a man whose son's gambling debts Dante had quietly erased, stood at the gates of the massive Hudson Yards project. He looked at the paperwork for the first of 30 cement trucks, shook his head, and slapped a red rejected stamp on the manifest. The concrete mix, he declared, was substandard, and failed to meet structural integrity codes. The entire pour was cancelled. The $400 million tower was dead before its foundation could even set. At 6:30 a.m., Richard Marlowe's phone rang, waking him from a restless sleep. It was his project manager, his voice high-pitched with panic. Substandard? We've used this supplier for 3 years. It's your supplier. Richard roared, throwing back his $1,000 sheets. He told him to call the backup. By 7:15 a.m., the manager called back, his voice now a strangled whisper. The backup supplier, their entire fleet just failed a surprise DOT inspection. They're grounded. Richard was barely dressed when his second project manager called at 7:45 a.m. The steel shipment for the Tribeca Tower, the massive girders that were the building's bones, had disappeared. What do you mean it disappeared? Richard shouted. You can't lose 80 tons of steel. It's a rail yard snafu, the man stammered. It's in a yard in Jersey, but the union local just started a wildcat strike. Something about unsafe conditions. They won't let anyone near it. Could be weeks. Richard slammed down his phone. A cement delay? A permit issue? A strike? These were problems for nobodies, not for him. He was Richard Marlowe. He built the skyline. He didn't deal with these pathetic, low-level inconveniences. He'd crush this. He'd make one call and have that union boss fired and the inspector's pension pulled. If you can't stand people who think they're above everyone else, hit subscribe. Only people who think they're a Marlowe would ignore it. He speed-dialed his man at the city council. The phone rang and went to voicemail. He tried his contact at the Port Authority. Voicemail. He tried a deputy mayor whose campaigns he had funded for a decade. The man's assistant picked up, sounding flustered. I'm so sorry, Mr. Marlowe, he's in an emergency session. He'll be unavailable, indefinitely. The word hung in the air, cold and final. Indefinitely. That was when the third call came. The Queen's waterfront project. His crown jewel. Mr. Marlowe, his lawyer said, his voice funereal. The EPA just got an anonymous tip. They're freezing all permits. They think they found nesting grounds for the piping plover. A bird? Richard screamed. You're telling me a bird is stopping a $500 million development? A federally protected bird, Richard. This ties us up in court for a year. Maybe 2. Richard finally understood. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an attack. This was a coordinated, systematic, and invisible strangulation. In less than 3 hours, his $1.2 billion in active projects had been brought to a dead halt. His stock, on pre-market trading, was already nosediving. His investors were calling, his bankers were calling, all of them in a blind panic. But Richard Marlowe ignored the ringing from Chase and Goldman. His hands were shaking, but not from fear of bankruptcy. It was a much more primal terror. He walked to his desk, pulled a burner phone from a locked drawer, and dialed a number he prayed he would never have to use. We have a problem, he said, his voice a dry croak. An hour later, he wasn't in his glass tower office. He was in a dark, private dining room at the back of an old-school steakhouse in Brighton Beach. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and lemon furniture polish. Across the table sat Vasily. He wasn't large or imposing. He was a small, neat man in a flawlessly tailored suit, sipping black tea from a glass. His eyes were pale blue, entirely without warmth, and they never seemed to blink. He was the enforcer, the resident, the man who handled the Russian syndicate's investments in New York. Explain the problem, Rickard, Vasily said, his voice soft, the accent thick. The projects are frozen, Richard stammered, the words tumbling out. All of them. Supply chain, permits, it's a bureaucratic nightmare. It's a temporary halt. We'll fix it. Vasily placed his glass down with a delicate click. He was completely, utterly uninterested in permits. He didn't care about supply chains. "We gave you $80 million, Rickard," Vasily said, as if explaining something to a child. "Not to invest. To clean. It is dirty money. It goes into your concrete and your steel, and it comes out as clean apartments in your shiny towers. But it must move. Right now, our 80 million is not moving. It is sitting in your frozen projects. This makes my employers unhappy. I just need time." Richard pleaded, the sweat gathering on his brow. "A week. I'll sort it out." Vasily smiled, but the expression didn't touch his dead eyes. "Time. Yes. You have time." He leaned forward. "My employers do not believe in interest rates. They believe in collateral." He steepled his fingers. 48 hours. That is your time. If the projects are not moving, if our money is not cleaning, we will take our first payment. He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Your son," Vasily said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Ethan. He enjoys parties, yes? It would be a tragedy if he was found in his expensive car. With no hands. And no feet." Richard's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a death sentence. He was trapped. The invisible enemy strangling his company had just pushed him into the arms of a monster who would literally tear his family apart. 48 hours, Rickard. Vasily stood, adjusting his cuffs. He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob, as if remembering something. "This problem. It is strange, no? It happens just after your son makes a mess at a party. This waitress, this Saphae," he pronounced the name carefully. "You see, we do not believe in coincidence. We believe in blackmail. We believe this cheap woman is shaking you down, and you are too weak to stop her." He looked back, his pale eyes pinning Richard to the wall. "Find out who is blocking us," Vasily said, his voice like gravel. "Find this waitress. Make her talk. Then make her disappear. These guys are pure evil. Comment justice for Sophia below if you're not on the side of these monsters." Sophia felt like she was living underwater. The world had tilted, its colors muted, its sounds distant and distorted. She was moving through the motions of her life, making coffee, showering, getting dressed, but she was a ghost in her own home. The man sleeping beside her, the man whose rhythmic breathing had been her comfort for 12 years, was a stranger. Dante was calm. Terrifyingly calm. He would kiss her goodbye. In the morning, his lips the same, his touch the same, but his eyes were different. They were occupied. He was a general moving pieces on a board she couldn't see. He told her he was handling it, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it didn't just mean the Marlos. It meant everything. She existed in the upside down, a world where her husband, the construction foreman, was a king, and she was the only person in the kingdom who had never known. Her humiliation at the hotel felt like a lifetime ago, a trivial, almost childish insult compared to the colossal, terrifying reality of her marriage. She was so wrapped in her own existential crisis that she never noticed the gray sedan parked half a block down from her brownstone. She didn't see the man in the passenger seat lift a camera with a telephoto lens. She didn't notice him follow her on the subway, standing just 5 people back, his face buried in a newspaper. Vasily was not a man who believed in complexity. He believed in leverage, weakness, and direct action. He had his team investigate the waitress, and the report he got back only confirmed his theory. "She's clean," his man reported, standing in the same Brighton Beach steakhouse, now empty in the light of day. Lives in a Brooklyn brownstone, owned outright. Married 12 years to this guy, Dante Morelli. He's a foreman for a dozen different subcontractors. Union guy. A nobody. Vasily silently stirred his tea. A foreman. A waitress. A paid-off brownstone. It was so transparently, pathetically simple. The viral video of the humiliation was the key. It wasn't the insult, it was the opportunity. His brutal logic clicked into place. The waitress, this Sophia, was not a victim. She was a clever, low-life extortionist. She saw an opportunity for a shakedown and took it. She must have threatened to go to the press with more dirt on the Marlows, maybe claiming Ethan assaulted her, or that there was a pattern of abuse at the hotel. Richard Marlowe, a weak fool terrified of bad press and scandal, was trying to pay her off, probably stalling his own projects to move the money. Or worse, the waitress was just a front for a smarter, more dangerous crew who were now squeezing Marlowe from the shadows. It was so simple to them. The waitress was a blackmailer. The Project Freeze was the leverage. They'd teach her a lesson. They're blaming the victim. If you know that's wrong, show your support by hitting subscribe. Trolls and real-life victim blamers won't. A snake, Vasily murmured, his pale blue eyes cold. A small snake, but it can still poison the well. You cannot negotiate with a snake, Rickard, he told the trembling developer over the phone. You cut off its head. He gave the order. It wasn't for a conversation. It wasn't a warning. It was a solution. Remove the variable. End the blackmail. Get the money flowing. That evening, Sophia forced herself to go to work. It was an act of defiance, a desperate attempt to reclaim some piece of the before. She needed to feel normal, to iron her uniform and walk those floors, to prove that her life wasn't completely gone. But the armor was cracked. Every guest stare felt like an accusation. Every whisper sounded like a threat. Philip, the manager, avoided her entirely. She was a pariah, a ghost haunting her own life. She left her shift at 11, exhausted and vibrating with a new, pervasive anxiety. The city felt sharp, hostile. The walk to the subway was a gauntlet of shadows. She got to her car, parked a few blocks from her apartment, the one she used for errands. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. She just wanted to be home. To lock the door and slide the deadbolt and pretend, for just a few hours, that none of this was real. She drove through the familiar Brooklyn streets, her mind a fog of fear and fatigue. She took the ramp onto the BQE, heading for the Brooklyn Bridge exit. Traffic was heavy for a weeknight, a river of red taillights. She merged, keeping a careful distance. Up ahead, a large box truck suddenly flashed its brake lights, its back end swerving slightly as it slowed for a merging car. Sophia's foot went to the brake pedal. It wasn't there. It didn't feel soft. It didn't pump. It sank to the floor with a single, sickening, empty thud. There was no resistance. Nothing. A jolt of pure, undiluted adrenaline punched through her fatigue, sharp as a needle to the heart. No. No, no, no. She stomped the pedal again, uselessly, the metal hitting the floor. She yanked the emergency brake, but she was going too fast, the lever only offering a high-pitched, useless squeal. The truck's bumper was getting closer, closer, filling her entire windshield. She was a missile. She had one choice. With a scream that tore from her throat, she wrenched the steering wheel to the right. The car shot out of the lane, tires shrieking in a sound of pure agony, a protest against physics. Time didn't slow down, it shattered. She saw the concrete divider. Metal collided with concrete in a deafening, final crunch. Her head snapped forward, striking the steering wheel. The world didn't just spin, it fractured, exploding into a million bright, painful fragments of light. Then, complete, terrifying, absolute blackness. The first sensation was the smell. Antiseptic, cold, and sterile. The second was the sound, a quiet, rhythmic beep, too slow, too steady. The third was the pain, a dull, comprehensive throb that started in her skull and radiated down to her ribs, which felt like a cage of shattered glass. Sophia's eyes fluttered open. This was not a city hospital. The room was vast, private, and silent. The walls were a soft, sterile white, the equipment new and gleaming. The only sound was the faint hum of an air filtration system and the steady, digital pulse of her heart monitor. He was there. Dante was not in the cheap plastic guest chair, slumped over in a weary sleep. He sat in a heavy leather armchair that looked like it had been taken directly from his home office. It was placed against the far wall, angled toward the door, like a sentinel. He was in the same suit he'd worn that morning, immaculate and uncreased, but his eyes were rimmed with red. He hadn't slept. And he wasn't watching her. He was watching the door. Dante. Her voice was a dry, painful croak. His head snapped toward her. He stood, his movement all economy, and crossed the room in 2 strides. He was not the worried, frantic husband she would have expected. He was the man from the office. The king. "You're in a private clinic in Westchester," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "You're safe here. No one knows where you are." "What happened?" she whispered, the memory rushing back, the sickening lurch, the useless pedal, the scream of metal. "The brakes." "It wasn't an accident, Sophia." He stated it as a fact, not a revelation. "They cut your brake lines." "They?" "Not hit. They." The single word hung in the sterile air, heavy and lethal. The beeping of her heart monitor sped up, a frantic bird in her broken cage. Who, she managed to ask, though she already knew. The Marlows? For the first time, a fissure of emotion cracked his stone-like facade. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, corrosive self-loathing. "I did this," he rasped, his voice raw. "My mistake." He turned away from her, walking to the window. "My way. Might clean a war. I thought I could squeeze them, bankrupt them like a businessman." He spat the word. "I thought I was smarter. I thought I could control it." He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. "But I was wrong. I was playing a game of chess, and they set fire to the board. My attempt to be less, my arrogance, it almost got you killed." "It wasn't the Marlows," Sophia whispered, the cold dread of understanding spreading through her. "No." He turned back to her, his face a mask of cold fury. "The Marlows are puppets. They are nothing. Richard Marlowe is in over his head, laundering money for the Bratva. A Russian syndicate. The man in charge is named Vasily. A name. It made it real. Russians. A syndicate. This wasn't her life. This was a nightmare. They don't understand permits or supply chains," Dante continued, his voice hard, precise. "They only understand money and violence. When I froze Marlowe's projects, I froze their cash. And they don't know about me. They don't know who I am." He pulled the heavy chair from the wall and sat beside her bed, his eyes locking on hers. They looked at the situation, at the viral video of Ethan, at the construction halt, and they came to their own conclusion. "What conclusion?" she breathed, afraid of the answer. "That you're the one blackmailing Richard. That you're not a victim, you're a gold digger who got greedy. They think you are the one pulling the strings, that you're the one squeezing them." He let that sink in, let her feel the weight of their mistake. "Cutting your brakes wasn't a warning, Sophia. It was a solution. They thought they were cutting the head off the snake." The air in the room felt too thick to breathe. She saw it now. There was no going back. There was no before. The police couldn't help her. Her old life, the lie, was gone forever. So what happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. Do we run? Do we hide? Dante actually scoffed, a bitter, sharp sound. Run? Hide? He shook his head. They would find us. They would hunt us to the ends of the earth. You don't run from men like Vasily. You erase them. The facade was gone. The foreman, the husband, the man she thought she knew, all of it was vapor. In his place was the predator. The king. His eyes were burning with a cold, protective fury that was more terrifying than any rage. My clean war is over, he said. My way failed. Now, we do it the old way. The only way. I stop being the man I've been pretending to be for you, and I become the man they are all afraid of. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. But to do that, I need you. Her heart stalled. Need me? For what? They think you're the blackmailer, he said, his voice a whisper. They think you're the one in charge. They're going to want to meet you, to finish the job they started. I need them to. The implication slammed into her, taking what little breath she had left. You want me to be bait. I want you to be the trap, he corrected her, his gaze unwavering. I will be there. My men will be everywhere. They will never be within 10 feet of you, I swear it. But I need you to make the call. I need you to be the one who draws the beast out of its cave. It's the only way to end this. It's the only way you'll ever be safe. The choice was laid bare. She looked at this man. This monster. The killer who had lied to her for 12 years. The man whose own arrogance had put her in this hospital bed. But she also saw the unshakable truth in his eyes. He was not just a monster. He was her monster. He was the only thing in the world standing between her and a grave. Her terror was absolute, but the alternative, running, looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life, waiting for the next car to fail, the next shadow in an alley, was a different kind of death. She had to choose. Trust the man who had lied to her. Trust the killer who loved her. Or die. Her heart monitor, which had been racing, suddenly steadied. A cold, hard calm settled over her, the same crystalline fury she had felt after the gala, but now it was different. It was colder. It was his. She met his gaze, her own eyes hardening. The victim was gone. What do I have to do? It was 2 days. 2 days of existing in the eye of a storm, in the suffocating calm of their brownstone, which no longer felt like a home, but a fortress. A war room. Sophia's ribs were taped, a deep, ugly purple bloom of a bruise covered the side of her face. She was a living, breathing testament to their mistake, to his mistake. Dante's guilt was a tangible thing in the room, a low-frequency hum of rage. He had coached her, his voice a low monotone, devoid of all emotion except a chilling, precise focus. She was an actor now. Her life depended on this performance. Her hand was shaking as she dialed the number. She didn't have to fake that. Dante stood across the room, watching her, his face unreadable. The phone picked up on the first ring. Who is this? Richard Marlowe's voice was a dry, frayed nerve. Mr. Marlowe. Sophia let her voice crack. She let the pain from her ribs seep into the words, a shaky, desperate gasp. This is Sophia Martinez. The waitress. From the gala. Silence. A dead, shocked void on the other end of the line. She could practically hear his blood run cold. How did you get this number? He finally whispered. That doesn't matter, she said, pushing a new, sharp edge of greed into her terror. This was the part Dante had drilled into her. She had to sound like an amateur in over her head, someone who'd stumbled into leverage and was now trying to cash it in. I know what's happening. I know why your projects are stopped. I know who's doing it. I think. I heard things. What are you talking about? I can make it stop, she said, a convincing, greedy sob catching in her throat. I have information. Proof. But it's going to cost you. What you and your son did to me, it cost me. He was hooked. She could hear the shift in his breathing, the desperate, pathetic hope of a drowning man. What do you want? $1 million. In cash. Non-sequential, or whatever. You know. She sounded pathetic. An idiot. Perfect. An abandoned warehouse. Pier 4, in Red Hook. Tonight. Midnight. Come alone, Mr. Marlowe. Or I go to the press with everything. Not just the video. Everything. She hung up, not waiting for a reply. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a dry, racking sob of terror. Dante was at her side in an instant, but he didn't hold her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. You were perfect, Sophia, he said, his voice raw. You were perfect. He'll call them, won't he? The Russians? He'll call them, Dante confirmed, his eyes hardening. He's a coward. He'll tell Vasily that a blackmailer is making her move, and Vasily will come to cut the head off the snake. The call came to Vasily 2 minutes later. Richard, blubbering, relayed the conversation. A warehouse. Midnight. $1 million. The stupid, greedy waitress. Vasily smiled. He hung up on Richard and made 3 calls of his own. He wasn't just going to kill her. He was going to find out who she was really working for. He'd take his time. He'd bring his tools. Midnight in Red Hook. The air was thick and cold, carrying the smell of rust and the dead fish tang of the low-tide river. The warehouse was a cavernous tomb of corrugated steel, its windows shattered, its floor a graveyard of rotted pallets and debris. A single, bare utility bulb hung from a wire in the center of the space, illuminating a small, trembling figure. Sophia. She stood there, clutching a duffel bag to her chest, her face pale, the bruise on her cheek a ghastly purple in the dim light. She was the perfect, pathetic bait. From a high, dark catwalk, 300 feet away, Dante watched her through a pair of military-grade night vision binoculars. He wasn't breathing. Beside him, Luca, his most trusted man, held a suppressed rifle, his eye never leaving the sight. 6 other men, Dante's ghosts, were hidden. In the rafters, behind collapsed shelving, buried in the shadows. They weren't a crew, they were a scalpel. A vehicle door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps on gravel. The massive rolling door of the warehouse groaned open. 4 figures, silhouetted against the weak moonlight. They fanned out, moving with a fluid, military precision. These were not street thugs. These were professionals. Vasily was in the center, flanked by his 3 enforcers. They were calm, almost relaxed. They saw Sophia, small and alone, and their confidence was absolute. This was pest control. Vasily and his men stepped into the dark warehouse, fanning out, guns drawn but faces relaxed. They saw Sophia, a small, trembling figure under a single cone of light. She was perfect. Scared, alone, and in over her head. This was a mastermind? This was the woman who had frozen $80 million? They were predators walking into a den, and they didn't even know it. If you're ready to see these arrogant thugs get what they deserve, smash that like button. Miss Martinez, Vasily's voice echoed in the vast space, his accent thick and oily. You have been a very foolish girl. You have caused us a great inconvenience. One of his men, a giant of a man, began to circle around to her left, cutting off any escape. Another moved to her right. The money, Sophia whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of terror. Did you bring it? Vasily actually laughed, a short, sharp bark. Money? Yes. We have a payment for you. He raised his hand. His men stopped, all three now equidistant from her. But first, you will tell me who you work for. You will tell me who is really behind this. And then. He drew a pistol, the long, black barrel of a silencer glinting. We will conclude our business. The man on her left was now 10 feet away, his hand reaching out, not for the bag, but for her. Sophia looked up. Her eyes met Vasily's. The terror on her face didn't just vanish, it was burned away by a sudden, cold, hard fury that matched his own. She looked at him, at the man who had tried to kill her, and she smiled. He's right here, she said. Vasily frowned. What? From the darkness above, Dante's voice, amplified by a small speaker planted near the door, boomed, cold and final. You're in my city, Vasily. And you are trespassing. Click. A bank of high-intensity, industrial-grade floodlights, the kind used for night construction, slammed on, bathing the warehouse in a white, sterile, blinding light. It was not a firefight. It was an execution. Vasily and his men, their night vision destroyed, were momentarily blind, throwing up their arms. From the rafters, 2 high-velocity thwips from Luca's rifle. The 2 flankers dropped, each with a neat hole in their skull before they even knew they were dead. The third man, the giant closest to Sophia, was fast. He lunged for her, his professional instincts screaming to take the hostage. He was a blur of motion. But a shadow detached itself from a pile of collapsed shelving. It wasn't Luca. It was another of Dante's men. The man moved with a speed that was not human. He met the Russian's lunge. There was no gunshot. Just a series of fluid, brutal, and utterly silent movements. A block. A twist. A long, dark blade sliding between the ribs, and a hand clamped over the man's mouth to muffle his dying gasp. It was over in 3 seconds. The man slumped, his fingers inches from Sophia's arm. Vasily was the only one left. He was a professional, a true predator. He didn't panic. He dropped, rolled, and came up firing, his silenced pistol spitting rounds at the shadow that had just killed his man. Thwip thwip thwip. He was firing at a ghost. The man was already gone. Vasily realized his mistake. He'd been drawn in. He spun, bringing his weapon up toward the source of the light, toward the catwalk. 2 more thwips from Luca's rifle. They struck Vasily square in the chest, punching him backward off his feet. He slammed against a steel support beam, his gun clattering to the concrete. He looked down at the 2 dark, blossoming stains on his suit, his pale blue eyes wide with the first, and last, surprise of his life. He slid down the beam, leaving a wet, dark smear. Silence. The air crackled with the smell of ozone and cordite. Sophia stood alone in the circle of light, shaking violently, but she was standing. She had not screamed. Luca was at her side in an instant, his rifle now slung, his own sidearm hot in his hand. He put a firm hand on her elbow. You're safe. Boss is moving. He guided her, not to the front, but to a small, hidden side door. Dante descended from the catwalk, his face a mask of stone. He walked through the abattoir he had created, his footsteps the only sound. He didn't look at the bodies. He walked to Vasily. The Russian was still alive, just barely, his lungs filling with blood. He gurgled, looking up at the man who had just destroyed him. Dante knelt. He took Vasily's phone from his suit pocket. He placed it on the man's chest, just above the dying, gurgling heart. A message. He stood, turned, and walked out the main door, leaving Vasily to die in the blinding, silent light. Outside, in the cold, damp air, a black Mercedes sedan was parked 50 yards down the dark, cobbled street. The engine was idling. Richard Marlowe was in the driver's seat, his entire body shaking so violently he couldn't even hold his phone. He'd been waiting for Vasily's call, for the news that the problem was solved, that the waitress was gone. Instead, he saw him. Dante Morelli. His foreman. His supplier. The waitress's husband. Walking out of the warehouse. Alone. Richard's brain ceased to function. The world inverted. The foreman, the waitress, the permits, the trucks, oh, God. Oh, God. Dante walked calmly, deliberately, toward the idling Mercedes. He didn't run. He didn't sneak. He just came. Richard fumbled for the door lock, his fingers spasming, but he was too slow. Dante reached the driver's side. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle, which he knew would be locked. He just looked at Richard, at the pathetic, broken, sobbing man on the other side of the glass. He raised his hand. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a small, heavy, ball-peen hammer from the pocket of his Carhartt jacket. He swung it once. An economical, precise arc of motion. The driver's side window exploded in a crystalline, deafening shower of tempered glass. Richard screamed, a high-pitched, animal sound, shielding his face as glass peppered his skin. Before he could even draw another breath, Dante's hand was inside. He unlocked the door, yanked it open, and grabbed Richard by the lapel of his $1,000 suit. He hauled him out of the car, throwing him to his knees on the wet, cold asphalt. Richard was blubbering, snot and tears mixing on his face. Please. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you, they made me, they were going to kill Ethan, please, don't kill me. I'll give you anything. Dante looked down at the pathetic, ruined billionaire. He felt nothing. Not anger. Not pity. Not even satisfaction. Just finality. He had used a tool, and the tool had broken. He reached into his jacket, and Richard squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for a bullet. Instead, Dante pulled out a folded piece of paper and a pen. He dropped them on the ground in front of the whimpering man. Get up, Richard, he said. His voice was perfectly calm, the voice of a man confirming a lunch order. We need to discuss the new ownership structure of your company. The pen trembled in Richard Marlowe's hand, spattering a tiny drop of blue ink on the crisp, white paper. He was on his knees on the wet cobblestones of Red Hook, the pulverized glass of his Mercedes window crunching under his expensive suit. It's a stock transfer agreement, Dante said, his voice flat, conversational. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just concluding a transaction. Marlowe Group. Controlling interest. To a holding company you've never heard of. The price is $1. Sign it. I'll sign, Richard wept, snot and tears streaking his face. I'll sign, just please. Vasily, his bosses, they'll kill me. They'll find me, they'll kill my family. Dante looked down at the broken billionaire with something bordering on boredom. That's your problem, Richard. Not mine. He reached into his jacket and pulled out Vasily's phone, the one he'd taken from the Russian's cooling body. He tossed it onto Richard's lap. When they call that phone looking for their man, you can explain where their $80 million went. You're a smart man. You'll liquidate your homes, your art, your private accounts. You'll pay them back. Or you won't. He left the true punishment unsaid. Richard Marlowe was now a living ghost, a man with a debt to the Russian syndicate that could only be paid in blood or money he no longer had. He would spend the rest of his miserable life looking over his shoulder. Richard's jagged signature was barely legible. Dante took the paper, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his jacket. He nodded to Luca, who had appeared silently from the shadows. Luca will drive you home. Don't leave the city. Don't try to run. We'll be watching. Dante turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Richard Marlowe to his new life in hell. The next morning, the sun rose on a new, restructured empire. At the staff entrance of the Riverside Grand Hotel, Ethan Marlowe stood in a pair of ill-fitting gray work pants and a gray polo shirt that smelled of industrial bleach. His face was a sickly pale, his eyes hollow and red-rimmed. He hadn't slept. His father had called him at 3 a.m., his voice a dead, hollowed-out echo, and given him the news. It was all gone. Philip, the ballroom manager, approached him. The terror he'd once felt for the Marlowe name was gone, replaced by a delicious, barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Marlowe," Philip said, drawing the name out. He held up a plastic name tag. It just said, Ethan. This is a joke," Ethan stammered, his hands shaking. "A mistake." "Your father arranged it," Philip said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "He said you needed to learn the business from the ground up. You're on my custodial crew. Your shift starts at 5 a.m. every day." He thrust a heavy industrial mop and a yellow wringer bucket toward him. Ethan just stared at it, his brain unable to process the object. "Ballroom first," Philip snapped, his brief flicker of enjoyment replaced by the familiar annoyance of a manager. Someone spilled a drink. Ethan's hands, which had only ever held champagne flutes and car keys, numbly gripped the wet, splintery handle of the mop. He was the joke. He was invisible. He was the help. He was the nobody. He'd finally learn what real work is. If you believe consequences are for everyone, not just the little guy, hit a subscribe. You know bullies like Ethan wouldn't want you to. He pushed the bucket, its wheels squeaking mournfully on the marble floor. As he entered the ballroom, the morning sun streamed through the crystal chandeliers, illuminating a million specks of dust. The first breakfast guests were arriving, laughing and talking, and they walked right past him without a single, solitary glance. Dante didn't come home until the following night. The brownstone was quiet, but it was a heavy, charged silence. He walked in, his suit immaculate, freshly pressed. Not a speck of dust from the warehouse, not a trace of the night's work. He was the businessman again, the man who ran an empire from a quiet office. He found Sophia in the bedroom. She wasn't crying. She was calm, her movements as deliberate and precise as his own. An open suitcase was on the bed, half filled with her jeans, her sweaters, her simple, practical clothes. Dante didn't stop her. He didn't ask her to stay. He walked to his dresser, pressed a hidden panel on the side, and opened a small, wall safe she had never known existed. He pulled out a small, organized bundle. He laid the items on the bed, next to her suitcase. A clean offering. First, a new U.S. passport. Her face, but a different name. Sarah Anderson. Second, a set of keys. A condo in Seattle, he said, his voice quiet. It's clean. It's untraceable. It overlooks the water. Third, a single, black, anonymous credit card. There are $5 million in an account tied to this. It's yours. He looked at her, his face a mask, but his eyes were filled with a profound, aching exhaustion. A new life, Sophia. Anywhere you want. You'll be safe. You'll never have to see me, or this, again. He paused, his voice cracking for just a moment. I will never let anyone hurt you again. Not even me. He was giving her the out. The clean break. The choice he had stolen from her 12 years ago. Sophia looked at the items. The passport. The keys. The promise of Sarah Anderson, a simple, safe, and anonymous life. She could be the person she was before the gala, before the crash, before the lie. But she wasn't that person anymore. That woman was gone. She thought of the humiliation, the cold shock of the Coca-Cola, the sticky sweet smell of it in her hair. She thought of the sickening, empty thud of the brake pedal hitting the floor. And then, she thought of the cold, absolute, and profound safety she had felt in that warehouse, standing in the cone of light, right after the world had exploded in violence all around her. She thought of the power that had just brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees, that had erased a nest of Russian vipers, that had turned a king into a janitor. She understood. The world wasn't clean. It wasn't safe. Justice didn't come from apologies, it came from power. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out. Her hand hovered over the Sarah Anderson passport. Then she closed her fingers around the black credit card. She stood, walked to the suitcase, and zipped it shut. With a decisive shove, she pushed it off the bed and onto the floor. She turned to Dante. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't the foreman's wife. She walked to him, took the credit card, and slid it into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket. A return. A partnership. She took his hand, his calloused of foreman's hand, the hand she now knew was stained with so much more than concrete dust. It was the hand of a killer. A king. And it was hers. She would not leave. She was no longer just a waitress. She was Sophia Morelli, the queen in a kingdom built on foundations of concrete and blood.